I am Tori Townsend, 28, a nurse in Hartford. My fiancé Nathan says I carry storms behind my calm smile. He is right because my father raised me under suspicion. Gerald Townsend always said I was too pretty to belong. He stared at my blonde hair like it was a confession. He called my blue eyes proof my mother betrayed him. I grew up feeling like evidence, not like a daughter. Diane, my mother, lived trapped inside his constant accusations. He never hit us, yet his words left bruises everywhere. At Sunday dinners, he sharpened his doubt like a ritual. Our table gleamed, but the air always tasted like fear. My brother Marcus learned to stay quiet and stay favored. He became the golden child by never challenging Gerald's story. I became the problem simply by existing in my body. When I was 7, I heard Diane crying behind their door. Gerald hissed ugly names, then blamed my hair again. I pressed my ear harder, trying to understand my life. That night I learned love could feel conditional and cold. I also learned my mother could shrink to survive him. By 12, I wanted volleyball, friends, something bright and simple. Gerald refused to sign, saying I was not worth investing. Marcus received new cleats the same week, smiling guiltily. At 18, Marcus went to Boston University on Gerald's money. I earned nursing school acceptance and watched Gerald's face harden. He told me my real father could pay my tuition, so I borrowed, waited tables, worked doubles, and kept going. 6 years later, I graduated with $60,000 in debt. The debt hurt, but the message hurt far worse. I was not his, therefore I was not worthy. The worst damage was what he did to Diane's mind. Every argument circled back to me, his favorite weapon. 5 years ago, Eleanor called at 2 a.m. My grandmother found Diane with an empty bottle of pills. Paramedics arrived in time, but the silence afterward screamed. Diane started therapy, medication, rebuilding herself piece by piece. Gerald never apologized, never admitted his doubt nearly killed her. He just waited. Certain science would someday crown him right. So when he demanded a DNA test before my wedding, I felt something inside me go still and razor sharp. It was Fairfield, Connecticut, in Gerald's 6-bedroom Tudor palace. Restoration hardware chairs surrounded an oak table polished to glare. Wedgwood china shone under the chandelier like staged innocence. Diane had wiped every plate as if perfection could shield. Eleanor sat at the far end, posture regal, eyes hunting. Marcus kept his gaze on his food, jaw clenched, compliant. Gerald cleared his throat like he was preparing a verdict. He said he would not attend my wedding, not anymore. The words exploded quietly, the way a grenade steals oxygen. Diane's fork clattered, and her whisper begged him to stop. Gerald reached into his jacket and slid paper toward me. It was a consent form for a paternity test. His signature waited at the bottom, arrogant, already claiming control. He told me I had 6 weeks to comply. He demanded I take the test and make results public. If I was his, he promised an apology and attendance. His smile looked rehearsed, but his eyes stayed mean. He said we both knew what the test would show. Eleanor's teacup struck its saucer, sharp as a warning bell. Diane cried silently, tears falling onto her linen napkin. I stared at Gerald's Rolex, flashing beneath the chandelier's light. I thought he has been building to this moment forever. I did not sign, and I did not storm out. I simply said, "Thank you for the reminder, Gerald," sincerely. I told him I would remember this, and I meant it. My calm unsettled him because he expected pleading or rage. Instead, I carried his ultimatum home like a loaded stone. I drove back to Hartford through dark roads and heavier thoughts. Nathan waited on our couch, laptop open, wine poured carefully. He asked what Gerald did this time, voice tight with anger. I told him about the consent form and the deadline. Nathan said I should do it, prove Gerald wrong once. He wanted me free from that doubt, free from humiliation. I looked at my modest ring, designed from my old sketch. It was simple and perfect, nothing like Gerald's flashy trophies. I told Nathan it was not about proving Gerald wrong. I told him it was about freeing my mother from torture. Nathan went quiet because he remembered the pills and sirens. He watched my face and nodded, like he accepted my war. I researched genetics labs months before, quietly, like preparation. I chose GAN Trust, independent, certified, not connected to Gerald. I decided I would take the test, but my way. 2 weeks later, Gerald turned 60, and the party arrived. Fairfield Country Club glittered with manicured greens and ocean views. 30 relatives gathered, celebrating the man who made our home prison. I wore a simple black dress, and Nathan squeezed my hand. He whispered we could survive 2 hours, but we could not. After 3 glasses of expensive wine, Gerald stood to speak. He praised Marcus's finance career, then thanked Diane for patience. Then he found me with his eyes and he performed. He called me his daughter, but the word dripped with contempt. Uncomfortable chuckles traveled the room like sick little insects. Gerald said he hoped I was ready to prove origins. Marcus half rose, asking Gerald to stop, but Gerald waved. He said honesty mattered, then smiled that reptile smile. He compared me to a cuckoo egg in another nest. He said the egg looks beautiful, but it does not belong. An aunt gasped, a cousin snickered. Diane stared downward, shaking. Tears fell onto her bracelet, a guilt gift from Gerald. I stood steady and my voice did not tremble. I repeated, "Thank you for the reminder, Gerald. I remember." I asked Diane to step outside for air, gently. Diane took my hand like it was a lifeline. We walked past whispers, past stares, past Gerald's smug posture. In the parking lot, Eleanor caught us with heels like gunshots. She said Gerald was a small man with a big ego. Her eyes held urgency I had never seen before. She said something happened the night I was born. Strange. She led us to a bench overlooking the golf course. The sunset painted the sky, and Eleanor's voice dropped lower. She said St. Mary's Hospital felt wrong that night, tense. She said a nurse brought me out too quickly, terrified. She said the nurse fled the room like she stole something. Diane stiffened, whispering she never heard this story before. Eleanor admitted she tried investigating, but the hospital stonewalled her. They claimed everything was normal and sealed records for privacy. Eleanor pulled yellowed paper from her purse, careful and triumphant. She copied my birth record before they locked everything away. The record said I was born at 11:47. Diane whispered she gave birth at 11:58, not earlier. She remembered the clock, the doctor joking about leap day. 11 minutes hung between us like a wire ready to snap. Eleanor pointed to a name, head nurse Margaret Sullivan. She said Margaret retired years ago, and Eleanor had her address. The next morning, I went to Gantrust in Hartford. I carried 3 DNA samples, sealed like truth in plastic. My swab was easy, sterile tube, routine, nothing dramatic. Diane offered her sample with tears but steady hands. She said nothing changes. I am your daughter, always. Gerald's sample was stolen, strands from a brush in bathroom. I used that bathroom every holiday, pretending I did not notice. Gerald always flinched when I reached past him for soap. A technician named Dr. Reyes explained timing and confidentiality and law. Results in 3 weeks, legally admissible, no contamination risk. I paid extra for expedited processing, because I needed momentum. Eleanor insisted on covering cost, like she was funding justice. That afternoon, I called Margaret Sullivan, heart hammering like fists. A trembling older voice answered, and I introduced myself carefully. I said I was born March 15th, 1997 at St. Mary's. Margaret blurted she could not help me, panicked and fast. She said she did not know what I meant, then begged. She said do not contact me again, and she hung up. I stared at my phone, feeling the chill of guilt. Nathan looked up, and I said she knows something, definitely. An innocent woman would have been confused, not terrified. That night, I realized truth had been buried by fear. I also realized I was ready to dig it up. Gerald wanted a public reckoning, so I started building one. I promised myself I would not waste another year obeying him. I was parked outside my hospital, hands trembling on steering wheel. An email arrived, not to me alone, but to everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins, strangers from childhood, 47 recipients total. My mother and Eleanor and I were included, cornered publicly. The subject line referenced my wedding, like it was courtroom evidence. Gerald wrote he carried a burden for 28 years. He wrote he endured doubt and watched Diane refuse truth. He wrote, I refused testing, and that refusal spoke loudly. He wrote he would not attend the ceremony without public resolution. He attached a family photo from my christening, cruelly annotated. In the image, my pale face sat among brunette relatives. Gerald circled my face in red and wrote spot difference. Within hours, replies flooded in, some defending Diane, most probing. They asked careful questions, thirsty for drama and certainty. Marcus called me that night, frustration tightening every word. He told me to do what Gerald wanted, stop ruining reputation. I laughed, a sharp sound that shocked even me. I asked, his reputation is what matters to you now. Marcus did not answer, and he hung up quickly. 3 weeks after my samples, the results arrived Tuesday night. Nathan was in Boston for work, and I was alone. A half-eaten salad sat on the table, untouched, forgotten. My laptop played a show, but I heard nothing. The document was secure, clinical, and I opened it anyway. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. It said zero genetic match with Gerald Townsend, subject B. I expected that possibility, and I had braced for it. Then the second line ripped the air from my lungs. It said, zero genetic match with Diane Townsend, subject C. I stopped breathing like the kitchen had filled with water. I called the after-hours line, demanding an explanation, voice cracking. A technician explained there was no contamination, no error, no mistake. The science was conclusive, and my body felt unreal. Not his daughter, not her daughter, not anyone I understood. It meant Diane never cheated, because I was not hers. It also meant something impossible happened in the hospital. I slid down onto the kitchen floor, back against cabinets. I stared at the ceiling and felt years collapse into minutes. Gerald was wrong about the affair, but right about me. At dawn, I drove to Fairfield, timing it for Gerald's golf. Diane sat in the sunroom, robe on, tea steaming softly. She looked up and her face creased with immediate concern. I handed her my phone, report glowing, and watched her read. Color drained from her face, like someone opened a hidden valve. Her lips moved silently, reading numbers again and again. She whispered it was wrong, it had to be wrong. I told her I called the lab, triple-checked everything. Diane insisted she gave birth to me, 14 hours of labor. She said she saw me red and screaming and absolutely hers. I took her ice-cold hands and told her I believed her. I told her that belief left only one explanation standing. Something happened at St. Mary's Hospital, and someone hid it. Diane whispered about the time discrepancy, 11 minutes, always bothering her. She said the certificate said 11:47, but she remembered 11:58. 11 minutes became a cliff edge in my mind. I told her if I was not her biological daughter, then her real daughter existed somewhere, living someone else's life. Diane began sobbing, not silent tears, but shaking, primal grief. She said we must find her, find both of them. Before we could plan, Gerald found out through Marcus's obedience. Marcus saw the report on Diane's phone during lunch. Within an hour, my phone rang, and Gerald sounded triumphant. He asked what it said and if he was right. I could not explain right and wrong at once, so I stayed silent. My silence fed him, and he laughed with pure vindication. He declared he was right all along, and nobody believed him. He said he would email everyone again, this time with proof. He said Diane lied for decades, and now everyone would know. He hung up before I could tell him Diane never lied. Within the hour, he called Diane and ordered her out. He told her to pack, leave by month's end, done. Eleanor drove over immediately, standing guard like a silver sentinel. When I arrived, Diane curled on couch like a wounded animal. Eleanor stood above her, chin lifted, eyes burning with purpose. I told them Gerald thinks he won, but he only saw half. Eleanor said then we show him the rest of story. The next 3 days were the hardest of my life. I considered canceling the wedding because I could not breathe. Nathan refused, holding my face, saying we do not postpone life. But I could not move forward without the truth unlocked. The truth was trapped inside Margaret Sullivan's fear and memory. I called her 5 times in 3 days, every call, voicemail. On the 6th call, I left a different message, sharper. I said I had certified evidence a baby was switched that night. I said I did not want to blame her, only understand. Then I said my next call would be to a lawyer. I said I would subpoena records, file investigation, expose everything. I waited, pacing, checking my phone like it held oxygen. At 4:17, a text came from an unknown number. It said Thursday, 2 in afternoon, Riverside Diner, Bridgeport. It said come alone, and my stomach turned to cold metal. Riverside Diner looked forgotten. Vinyl booths patched, jukebox humming oldies. Coffee smelled like it had brewed since the Reagan administration. Margaret sat in a corner booth, back to wall, hands shaking. She was 72, smaller than I imagined, face tight with guilt. When I slid into the seat, she studied me carefully. She whispered I looked just like her, and my heart stuttered. She said Linda, my biological mother, had the same hair and eyes. I asked how she knew, and her eyes filled with water. She said she carried this for 28 years, every day. She pulled out a worn leather journal, pages yellowed, edges frayed. She called it her shift log from March 15, 1997. She opened to a flagged page and slid it toward me. I read cramped handwriting and felt my blood run cold. 11:47, baby girl 1, born to Diane Townsend. Healthy, 7 pounds 2 ounces, already named, already loved. 11:58, baby girl 2, born to Linda Morrison. Healthy, 6 pounds 4 ounces, another family holding their miracle. Then the words incident, trainee nurse, mixed up infants after bathing. Margaret wrote realized error at 2:15, families already bonded. She wrote meeting with administrator, decision to correct records, not families. She wrote non-disclosure agreements required for staff present. I looked up, hands shaking, and whispered they knew that night. Margaret nodded, voice cracking, saying the administrator feared lawsuits. She said they threatened her license, pension, livelihood, and her children. She said she hated herself, but she stayed quiet to survive. I asked who the other baby was, the one Linda took. Margaret pulled out a printed profile, a woman my age smiling warmly. She said her name is Rachel Morrison, living in Springfield, Massachusetts. She was an elementary school teacher, volunteering at an animal shelter. Her brown hair and warm eyes looked like a mirror of Marcus. I composed my message 17 times, rewriting every sentence with care. I apologized for sounding insane, then explained DNA and the nurse. I said 2 babies were switched at St. Mary's that night. I said I believed she was Diane and Gerald's biological daughter. I said I had documentation and a witness, and I wanted nothing. I included my number, hit send, then shut the laptop fast. I stared at the ceiling, heart racing, like I was 14 again. 24 hours passed, and I checked my phone constantly. At 9:38 the next night, my phone finally rang. A shaky voice asked if I was Tori, and my throat tightened. Rachel said people always joked she did not resemble her parents. She said her legal father joked the hospital made a mistake. She laughed, but it cracked into a sob halfway through. We talked for 3 hours, trading details, trying to sound rational. By the end, we agreed to another DNA test, fast. Rachel sent her samples to GonTrust with expedited processing. The results would arrive in 10 days, just before my engagement party. Over the next week, I built my case like a prosecutor. First, the documents, my report showing 0 match with Diane and Gerald. Second, Margaret's photographed shift log, dates, times, cold handwriting. Third, a notarized statement Margaret signed before a witness. She said she was 72 now, beyond their threats. Fourth, the witnesses. Eleanor would be there, eyes sharp as truth. Margaret agreed to attend, quiet in a corner until needed. Rachel agreed to come, waiting nearby until I summoned her. Nathan watched me stack papers, and he asked if I was sure. He said there was no taking it back, no hiding afterward. I thought about Diane's pills, her tears, Gerald's emails and jokes. I thought about Gerald calling me a cuckoo egg publicly. I told Nathan Gerald wanted public reckoning, so he would get it. I told Nathan everyone who believed Gerald needed to see truth. Nathan nodded slowly, then said we give them a show. 3 days before the engagement party, Rachel's results arrived. They showed 99.97 match with Gerald. They showed 99.98 match with Diane. I cried so hard my chest hurt, then I called Rachel. I asked her to meet me in person the next day. We chose a Starbucks halfway between Hartford and Springfield. Neutral ground. Rachel arrived early, 2 untouched lattes on the table. When she saw me, she stood so fast her chair wobbled. We stared at each other, strangers carrying each other's missing history. She had Gerald's jawline, the same subtle dimple on left cheek. She looked like Marcus, but softened, like a kinder parallel universe. I had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a button nose like Linda. Rachel whispered, "This is weird," then laughed. And I laughed too. We hugged and cried in the middle of Starbucks, ignoring stares. When we pulled apart, Rachel said she wanted to meet them. She meant Diane and Gerald, her biological parents, and my stomach clenched. I promised she would, in 3 days, at Whitmore Estate. Whitmore Estate was Eleanor's Georgian manor with roses and fairy lights. 60 guests arrived in cocktail attire, including every email recipient. I wore a navy dress and carried myself like victory already happened. Nathan stayed close, hands steady on my back. Diane arrived with Eleanor, eyes red but posture straighter than ever. Something had shifted in her, a weight lifting before vindication. Then Gerald arrived late, as always, in a designer suit. His Rolex flashed, and a smirk played at his mouth's corner. He moved through the room like a king collecting tribute. Relatives murmured sympathy, praising his patience, believing his narrative. Marcus stood beside him, uncomfortable but loyal, soldier trained by fear. In the corner, Margaret sat with water, hands trembling, face pale. Behind the connecting door, Rachel waited, breathing carefully, rehearsing courage. I checked my phone and Nathan nodded, saying it was time. Halfway through cocktail hour, Gerald asked for a microphone dramatically. The room quieted as he stepped onto the small platform. He congratulated Nathan, calling him brave for joining our complicated family. Nervous chuckles rose, and Gerald enjoyed the sound like power. He said everyone knew why he was there, and his eyes found me. He said he asked for DNA, and he knew I took it. He said he did not know why I hid results. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out paper. He said Marcus shared a copy. And Marcus looked ashamed finally. Gerald read 0 match with him, then 0 match with Diane. Gasps echoed, and Diane gripped Eleanor's hand hard enough to shake. Gerald's voice rose, shouting about 28 years of being right. He turned to Diane, accusing her of lying, of ruining his life. The silence afterward felt absolute, heavy, almost holy. Then I started walking toward the stage, footsteps steady, breath controlled. I stepped up, took the microphone from Gerald's hand calmly. He was so surprised he let me, still smiling wrongly. I said he was right about one thing. I was not his daughter. I said the report also proved I was not Diane's biological daughter. Gerald's smirk widened, thinking he had crushed Diane completely. I turned to the crowd, every face hungry for explanation. I said this was not proof of an affair. I said it was proof of an accident and a cover-up. I nodded toward the side door and told them to look. Rachel stepped through, brown hair, brown eyes, Gerald's face unmistakable. Someone dropped a glass, and the room erupted in whispers. Marcus made a strangled sound, recognizing his own features in her. I introduced Rachel Morrison, born the same night at St. Mary's. I said she was born 11 minutes before me, and time mattered. I explained a trainee nurse mixed up 2 infants after bathing. I said the hospital discovered the error, then chose secrecy to avoid lawsuits. I tapped my phone, and the wall display flickered to life. Rachel's DNA results appeared, matching Gerald and Diane almost perfectly. I told Gerald, she is your biological daughter, the one you hunted. Gerald's face went white, and his certainty crumbled in real time. I introduced Margaret Sullivan, and Margaret rose slowly from her corner. She stepped forward, voice shaking but clear, and confirmed everything. She said Diane never betrayed Gerald, and the hospital forced NDAs. She said she was sorry she waited decades to speak. I turned back to Gerald and said he wanted science. Here it is. I said every document, every signature, every 11 minutes was present. Gerald gripped the platform's edge like he was drowning. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed onto one knee. He whispered he did not know, asking how he could have known. I looked down at him, the man who made my childhood war. I said he could have trusted Diane, could have investigated, could have loved. I said genetics are complicated, recessive traits exist, mistakes happen. I said he chose suspicion anyway, and he chose cruelty daily. Across the room, Marcus stood up, and I held my breath. He walked past Gerald without helping, straight to Diane, eyes wet. He apologized, saying he should have spoken years ago. Diane pulled him into a hug, tears soaking his shoulder. Gerald stayed on his knee, watching his family choose each other. Then Diane stepped forward, heels clicking, and the crowd parted for her. She faced Gerald and said 28 years, voice steady and strong. She said she stayed because she loved him and believed he would trust. Gerald tried to speak, but Diane raised her hand, cutting him off. She said he did not get to apologize yet, not until public. She demanded apology before everyone who received the email. She demanded apology to me for birthdays, graduations, belongings stolen. She demanded apology to Rachel for the father she deserved. Gerald sobbed, shoulders shaking, and Diane said she needed him believing her. Then Diane turned away from him and walked to Rachel. She said hello softly, tears flowing, and said, "I am your mother." A week later, I drove to Springfield to meet Linda Morrison. Her house was modest, warm, with wildflowers loved into bloom. She opened the door before I knocked, eyes mirroring mine, blonde streaked with silver, blue eyes like a time machine. She hugged me, smelling of lavender and something that felt like home. We sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours, trading histories. She showed photos of grandparents I never met, already gone. She told me David, my biological father, died of cancer years ago. She said he joked Rachel had old soul eyes, and now she understood. I showed Linda my childhood photos, the blonde baby among brunettes. I told her Diane raised me, loved me, endured hell for me. Linda said she did not want to replace Diane, only respect her. I told Linda there might be room for one more mother. Her smile could have lit the whole small kitchen. 2 months later, Nathan and I married in Eleanor's rose garden. Fairy lights glowed, and both families gathered in careful new shapes. Diane walked me down the aisle, not Gerald, and that mattered. She wore champagne-colored silk and held her head high. Gerald sat in the second row, quiet, diminished, finally understanding consequences. Rachel stood with my bridesmaids in deep green, eyes shining. Linda sat in the front row too, honored, trembling with gratitude. Eleanor toasted truth and the long road it sometimes takes. After the wedding, Rachel and I filed suit against St. Mary's Hospital. Discovery exposed internal emails, memos, and budgets for hidden liability. The hospital settled, paying $450,000 to each family. They issued a public apology and changed newborn identification protocols. Margaret received immunity for cooperating, and she sent me a card. She wrote she could sleep now, and I believed her. I kept her card beside my corrected birth record, the honest time. 6 months later, Gerald asked me to dinner, just us two. He chose a quiet Italian place in Hartford, nothing flashy. His hair looked grayer, his shoulders smaller, like confession had weight. He said he was in therapy and couples counseling with Diane. He said they were separated but trying to see what remained. I told him he raised me, even if he did it badly. He flinched, then nodded, because truth finally reached him. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike when I was 5. I told him that father, the one who held on, was who I needed. I told him forgiveness is a process, not an event, and he agreed. Marcus and Rachel met properly at a family dinner a month later. Awkward at first, then laughter sparked over shared allergies and left-handedness. They both hated cilantro, and both tapped a foot when thinking. For once, a Townsend dinner held real laughter, not strained performance. 3 months later, Diane and Linda met for lunch without me. They traded photos of daughters raised but not birthed, crying together. Diane told me she felt no jealousy, only recognition of love. Now they meet monthly, calling each other the other mother. Tonight, in our new apartment, Nathan cooks, and I watch quietly. A pregnancy test rests nearby, positive, and my hands shake with wonder. I do not know which echoes of DNA will live in my child, but I know what my child will never inherit from me. My child will never feel like evidence, never feel like a verdict. My child will know love from the first moment, without condition. If you have lived under accusation, I want you to hear this. Truth has a way of surfacing, even after decades of silence. And if you are the one accusing, ask what it costs. Gerald spent 28 years certain, and certainty destroyed everything he loved. Trust is hard, doubt is easy, and cruelty feels powerful for cowards. So tell me, is Gerald worth a second chance? Or too late?